say, my 3 words. And first of all, my 3 words start off with inspired. I'm inspired by you all. I am also focused because I've heard a lot of high bars for what you're hoping to get out of today, and I'm focused on trying to deliver that. And if I'm off course at some point, please let me know. I welcome questions. And I think my 3rd word is I'm really passionate. I'm passionate about the association and nonprofit sector, and I hope to convey that to you. I would say a 4th word for me is upbeat, because I got to do a lot of laughing while I was waiting here. Regine kept me giggling, and my good colleague, Mark Milroy, I'll let you, he's going to share his career story. I've had the opportunity to come and speak to the 40-plus audience several times, and every time it's a great experience. And this time I wanted to bring a little different flavor, and Mark is an amazing professional and has a great career story that I think will resonate with each of you in a different way. So we're going to make sure to build in some time for him to share that with you. I want to thank Greg, Regine, the whole 40-plus team for inviting us again. It is such an opportunity and a pleasure whenever we have that chance to share the good news about the association and the nonprofit sector. You know, it's one of those sectors that people don't think about a lot. In fact, many people, and some of you mentioned that you've worked in this sector. And so just by show of hands, just to affirm, how many of you know the sector well, feel like you got it covered? Okay, so I've got some of you in here, and let me tell you, some of this you may go, yeah, I got it, I know it. So bear with me a little bit. How many of you have never worked in the nonprofit or association sector, but have worked in government? Government, okay, great, in the DC area, that's not uncommon, right? And how about the for-profit sector? There you go. So this sector is really big, and we'll be talking about that a little bit. So to what we'll be talking about, I'm going to go over a little bit of 101 for those of you familiar with the sector. Hopefully there's a nugget or 2 there, and those not familiar, hopefully it'll give you a lay of the land. We'll talk about association employment and give you some sense of scale and scope. How to speak associationese. So every sector, every industry has its own lingo and language. So if you're going to interview in the sector, if you're going to start looking at the sector, kind of getting a sense of what you need to know. Mark's going to share his career story with you, and then I'll jump back in, do a quick overview of the organization that I work for, ASAE, yes, the Association for Association. That's why we love the sector. Association Creech, which is a tool for you all that you can utilize in your job search within the sector, and then some other resources and notes of interest. Does that sound okay to everybody? All right, great. So definition and role of associations. So it may seem very simple, but it's really any group of people joined together for a particular purpose. And those purposes can range. A lot of people don't realize that a fraternity is an association. A sorority is an association. The JCs is a type of nonprofit association by this definition. And some of the charitable nonprofits as well, right? So it's people coming together, banded together for a purpose. And usually they're a continuing organization. And sometimes they have quite long tenures. So ASAE is approaching its 100th anniversary coming up in 2020. Many associations are having even more years than that. So that's the neat thing, is that when you go in, you're really a steward of a mission. You're moving that mission forward, and then somebody else is going to pick that up. So the neat sector to work in. So associations provide a platform, and they really influence and touch every industry, profession, and social issue. So the clothes that you're wearing, probably an association had something to do with standards around fabric being flammable. The car you drive, there's an association that's worked on standards for emissions. You know, the food we eat, there's associations involved in making sure that food is safe. So it really touches everything. In our fiscal year, we look at fiscal years September to August, the IRS recognized 63,866 trade and professional associations. So that's just the trade and professional association side. They also recognized 1,237,094 charities and philanthropic organizations. So the sector is over 1 million organizations strong. They are local, very local. They are state, they are regional, they are national, and they are international. Some of you mentioned international experience. Many associations that were originally in the U.S. are branching out now. Nonprofit organizations, and that's inclusive of membership organizations as well as charitable nonprofits, their share of GDP is over 5%. So this is a very powerful piece of the economy, and a lot of people don't really realize that. Trade and professional membership associations generate $116 billion in revenue. And according to the National Center for Charitable Statistics, as I said, over 1.5 million organizations were registered with the IRS in 2015. And in case you're wondering, that's growth, over 10% since 2005. So while there are many associations that have been around a long time, there are constantly new organizations forming as new industries emerge, as new issues come up that people want to address, as new standards are needed, those kinds of things. That's what happens. So associations do a number of things. They drive social awareness, advance professional excellence, and they provide advocacy. That's part of the core of what associations do, and that's where I'm going to focus. So the charitable space, that 501c3 space, tend to be cause-focused, right, on a social issue, maybe a condition or disease they're trying to eradicate or manage or help people live with or deal with. Sometimes they provide direct services. The charitable sector will deliver food for the hungry, medical services to needy communities, those kinds of things. For the trade association and professional society world, we're really generally focused on the needs of a profession, an individual professional society, or the needs of a trade and industry writ large. And I want to give you these examples, are real examples of association programs that are award-winning. ASAE has something called the Power of A, which we'll talk about a little bit. And they give out awards for innovative and interesting programs that associations are doing. So just one example, the International Food Technologists. How many of you have heard of that organization? Right, but they're there and they're actually quite big. And what they do is they focus on advancing the science of food. Science of food. I just like food, I don't know, but it's science apparently. And what they did was they funded a documentary film to be made, this film, Food Evolution, and it's really exploring how are we going to feed the world in 2050 when we are looking at potentially some very big issues that may make that very, very difficult. And so they're trying to spur a national dialogue that presents facts around science, food, and how we're all going to work together. An association is doing this. So some interesting things. The American Counseling Association, and many of you mentioned specific professional backgrounds, accounting, law, those sorts of things. You have a professional association, whether you know it or not, in some cases more than one, and they offer competencies to keep your education and skills current as well as certifications. And then advocacy. So you know, a lot of times we'll have the example of AARP up here, especially with this group. We know that Go AARP, right? And they actually have a lot of great career resources, but there's many other types of advocacy programs going on, including groups like the National Association of Federally Insured Credit Unions. That's a whole world, and they are out there advocating for that business sector. I saw one called Pedal It Forward, which is at the National Florist, the American Florist Association, promoting the business of being in the floral business and passing on bouquets and showing the joy of flowers. So they really do a whole bunch of things. And this is just a little more, so educating the workforce, serving the community, writing product standards. So I'm raising this because hopefully as you're sitting there looking at these slides and kind of learning more in depth what associations do, can you think about how your professional background may sync up with some of this? If some of you mentioned learning, educating, training, that's a huge component of what associations do. Writers, there are writers out there. The association sector employs a lot of writers and journalists, people with journalism backgrounds, because they are communicating all the time and doing publications. So hopefully as you look through this, you'll see this. Most associations, as I say, fall into those two tax categories, a 501c3 or a 501c6. That's just a tax status, no margin, no mission. Okay, so just because something's nonprofit does not mean that they don't turn a profit. It's just how they use that profit. They're going to put that back into furthering the mission. So many associations are becoming very business-minded. And so as you're looking at the sector, especially those of you who come from a for-profit background and can understand how to do a business plan, making things profitable, the need to balance overhead with revenue-generating products and services, those are the kinds of skills that you can actually transfer into the section. Just a smidge more about educating. Of the 57 million adults in America who take formal work-related courses or training each year, 17%, 9.7 million, receive training from a professional association. So they're really doing a lot out there. And then volunteering. How many of you have volunteered with a nonprofit or an association? Great, so you know 1 in 3 Americans, it's estimated, are touched and engaged with this sector. So it's out there and it's pretty powerful. So the Power of A, I mentioned this is ASAE's advocacy campaign for sharing the power of the sector. Some of those stats that I mentioned come from the Power of A research. And it's a campaign that's been around 10 years now. I highly encourage you to check out the Power of A. There's some great overview information about the sector there, some of which I've shared with you here, as well as some examples of what associations are doing. So it's a great resource there. So some structures for you. So types of associations. I've touched on this a little bit, and the reason why it will matter to you is because the different types of associations have different cultures. You need to understand that and then understand what kind of culture you want to work for. So trade associations, as I said, represent particular industries' interests typically. Most often they have a corporate or an organizational membership, not always, but most often. So the company is the member. They tend to be very advocacy focused because that industry is coming together to promote what they do and protect what they do. A lot of PR activity goes on, fundraising, those sorts of things. So it tends to be, I've not worked for a trade association, I think somebody in here has, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my colleagues on the trade association side tell me that it tends to be a more business-like structure and very focused on getting the industry positioned correctly and keeping it positioned correctly. They often are quite well funded because their members are companies versus individuals, so it takes fewer of those to create that budget. And there are trade associations that represent literally every kind of industry and business you can think of. Professional societies represent that particular profession or career. They are focused on helping individuals thrive in their careers and advocating those best practices, and very often they're individual members, which means that those cultures tend to be what you might imagine around the individual, right? Individual success. It is a lot more, people are very invested in the association. It can be a pathway for professional success and recognition. So the culture is just different. Like trade associations, there are some large professional societies with thousands of members. I worked prior to coming to ASAE for the American Physical Therapy Association. They had over 80,000 members before I left. So there's a lot of, especially in the healthcare space, there's some very big organizations out there that are professional societies. And then philanthropic organizations. These are those organizations that represent a cause. They have donors usually versus members. The people are coming very often from a personal place versus a professional place. I am part of my social work program. I volunteered at the ARC of Northern Virginia. I had an internship placement there. Those were moms and dads who wanted their kids who had developmental challenges. They were advocating for them. So again, a different culture. All great. You just need to know what resonates with you. These are some of the things they do. And hopefully, again, as you see this, you can see how your professional skills might come into play in some of these organizations. I think Somebody mentioned doing some government relations work, advocacy work. Certainly that works in both trade and professional societies, but certainly very much in the trade area. And then education, so if you have background in training, that kind of thing, that can work very well there too. I want to just talk a bit about, so that was the types of organizations, the structure and roles within associations. So there is a board, and the board owns the organization on behalf of the members. They own the strategic mission, and they set the direction of the association, the policies. Sometimes they're elected by the members as a whole, sometimes they're not. ASAE's board is not elected by the whole membership. APTA's was, so it depends. They are led by a chief elected officer, who is usually known as the board president or chair, and their role, in addition to making sure of the health of the organization and mission focus, they can hire and fire the executive director. So if you're interested in a C-suite or leadership position, you want to know how to work with boards and understand that. Boards then appoint committees to do certain things, and usually functional areas or projects, and volunteers then are engaged to work on those committees. There is a whole group of people who do volunteer relations within associations. So if you're good at organizing, connecting people, meeting minutes, making sure that groups, the work that they do can come to fruition and do that, that may be somewhere where you can fit into associations. And then association staff. So in a high-functioning organization, the CEO reports to the board evaluates the CEO, the CEO manages the staff versus the board. Now, many associations are micro to small business, 1 to 10 staff. So you may find that in some associations, the board is managing the staff. Hopefully though can find an organization where those boundaries have been negotiated well, and then each entity can do their work in a good way. So why do I mention that as well? Again, where can you see yourself? There's a whole role for governance. There are people, I have a very good friend who's been a director of governance and who oversees all the board meetings, all the materials, that kind of thing. Her background was in graphic design, by the way, so total segue into that. I just want to give you a note about AMCs. That's the Association Management Company. This is an entity, typically for-profit entity, that delivers services to associations, typically on a contract basis. Smith Buckland is a great example here in DC. They're very big, but there are solo practitioners who will manage components, say a state society, on contract, so they're not an employee of the association, and they'll deliver certain skills or services. So sometimes it's just finance. So some of you, I know, were in finance. An association may say, I just want somebody to come in and do my books, for example. Others, it's soup to nuts. So when you call that office, you're actually speaking to somebody who works for an association management company. They're employed by that entity, and they've been given that contract to oversee. So it's just another piece of the sector where you can potentially plug in. So employment, real quick, wanted to talk about, so do we employ people here? And yes, people are employed. Now, membership organizations is included trade, professional associations, religious organizations, grant making and giving services, social advocacy, and civic and social organizations. So, and you can see they employed over 1 million people. DC is a huge concentration for that. There is a myth in the sector that the pay is terrible. And I'm not going to say that it's not low in some cases, but specifically in trade associations and professional societies, it is actually pretty competitive. And depending on your position, you can see these averages. That was from 2013. ASAE puts out, and I'll have the book over here, compensation and benefits study that's done every 2 years. The latest one was just released, and so CEOs can make upwards of $200,000 or more, and professional staff, the director level above type of staff, can make 70,000 or more, depending on the organization, the size of the organization, the budget. It's all makes difference. And they also often will offer great benefits. So these are some high states where it's high, but in the DMV, so the District, Maryland, and Virginia, if it were a state, it'd be third behind California and Washington in total nonprofit, that membership, that broad membership employment. But really for associations, trade associations, professional societies, the DMV, Chicago, and New York are the big concentration where you're going to find a lot of those kinds of organizations. So you're in a good place if you want to work for an association. So the why, you can pick, what are you interested in? If you name it, there's an association for it or related to it. So that can be great because if you're going to spend your time doing something, you want to be sure you believe in it. And these are mission-focused organizations. Generally, the people on staff will share those passions with you to some extent, right? So that's always a good thing. And associations, as I showed you, really do make a big difference on some pretty big issues. So if you've never considered the sector, just a few reasons why. I've touched on this throughout, and I want to make sure to give Mark enough time, but ASAE has identified 75 job roles within associations. So think about it, they're social enterprises, and they need every kind of professional to operate just like a business, right? Just like an enterprise. So from the receptionist, which the person may greet you coming in, to a facilities person, to the whole finance accounting staff. Sometimes one person is wearing a lot of these hats if it's a smaller organization, but in larger organizations you would see exactly what you would see in a small company, different departments through all of these different functions. Technology, IT is becoming ever more important in associations like every business because that's how the world operates today. And so the role for technologists, for people who understand the intersection, some of you said marketing, between marketing and technology, called Marcom. That's MarTech. There's room for that there. So quickly, how to speak associationese. So I was speaking with someone and they said, I never get a call back. Well, I wish I could say that was true, not true in association space, everyone calls you back, but I think it's true in the employed world. Part of the reason is that many folks are wearing a lot of hats. They can be very pressed for time and resources. So they've got a lot going on. The example I give is at the ARC of Northern Virginia. When I did my internship there, the executive director was on the phone with Richmond on an advocacy issue. She hung up the phone, she crawled under her desk, she fixed her own IT because the printer wasn't working. She walked down the hall to make sure there was enough money in the kitty for the soda and paper fund for the month. And then she went to a board meeting that was being hosted at the office. So one of the things about the sector, there are large organizations, 50 plus, but there are also a lot of those smaller organizations which can be exciting, but just be ready to be flexible and to do a lot of things. But that may be why you're not hearing back, because sometimes they're just crazy busy. And you need to understand that. Some basic do's, do your research. I can't tell you how many interviews I've had where people have not bothered to look at the website. And I know that sounds very basic, but it keeps happening, so I feel like I kind of need to share it. And if you are, for example, if you were to come in and interview with me, I work for the for-profit subsidiary. You could dig around and find that, but if you hadn't done that research, I would wonder, did you really dig into that job and understand that? And some of the things I know you are already doing, and keep doing it. So one thing, don't call it a company. We all have a little chip on our shoulders. We're not companies, we're organizations, enterprises, doing good in the world. And talk about when you bring value, do they have donors? Are you trying to bring value to donors, to members, to the trade? Use some of that lingo. And talk about how you can support the organization's mission. As I said, don't interview without doing your homework. Associations are pretty transparent. They put their whole strategic plan online. Great thing to read before you walk in the door. That'll really make you stand out. They sometimes have budget minutes all online, whether they should or shouldn't. You can research using a 990. We'll talk about that later. And don't make assumptions about the capacity of an organization. It may have 5 staff, but I knew a guy who worked for a very small staffed association, but their members were 5 of the largest mining companies, I think it was, and they had a huge budget. So really take a look at those finances. It can tell you how they're doing. So with that, I want to turn it over for some time with Mark and let him tell his career story.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's great to be here and have a chance to talk to you. I've been working in associations for a long, long time, and I would tell you the very quick version of my history. Way back when I started working in higher education at a university in Ohio, and I joined the Ohio Association of College Admission Counselors. And after working, in a couple of years, I wanted to get involved and do something else, and so I volunteered and became more active in this organization, and eventually got involved in an activity that worked a lot with the folks in the staff office in Alexandria, Virginia. I was in Cleveland, Ohio. And long story short, an opening came up in Alexandria. And at the time, Jennifer was talking about the board of directors for the organization, for the National Association, not the Ohio one. A friend of mine was the chair of the board of directors for the National Association that year. We worked a few miles down the road. And I just happened to ask him, what do you know about that job in Alexandria? And he said, why, are you interested? And I said, why would I want to move to Washington? I ended up throwing in a resume. I got an interview, and then I got an offer, and I had to decide, do I want to move from Ohio to Virginia? And I decided to do it. It was very interesting to go from being a member, where you pay your dues and you're volunteering and doing stuff like that, to working for the staff, where you work on behalf of those members. I was no longer one of those out there. I was in the office, and my particular area was organizing this activity that I worked with. Well, I was with them for a few years, and then I went to another association called ASAE at one time, that stood for the American Production and Inventory Control Society. It was in the manufacturing realm. These folks were all about production efficiency. How do you streamline your manufacturing? So the members worked in factories all over the country and literally around the world as well. And so it was a whole new area for me. I hadn't done anything in manufacturing, but my area was in education. So I was helping to put together their learning programs to help their members learn to do their jobs better and putting those things together. So I started to learn a little bit more about manufacturing. And you hear about lean processes and Six Sigma and things like that. That just became the lingo of working in that office and for that group of people. Well, then I became an active volunteer again when I was working at ASAE. What association do you join when you work there? You join ASAE, the American Society of Association Executives. And I started volunteering and doing stuff with them, with this association of associations. Well, then a job opened up. And so once again, I moved from being a member to working on the staff at ASAE, and that's where Jennifer and I met. And I was on the staff there for about 10 years, and most recently was working as vice president of learning. Then an opportunity came along that kind of recruited me away to go to the American Industrial Hygiene Association. I'd never heard of industrial hygiene. I didn't know what it was. But I went over and interviewed with them, talked to them, and I started to learn that, okay, it's a professional society, and the members, industrial hygienists, are scientists, but they are all about worker health and safety. That's their whole world. They're using their scientific knowledge to make it safe. The whole idea is that you should not get injured, you should not get sick when you go to work. So that was a whole fascinating world to discover. Things like when, oh goodness, everything from the anthrax scare a few years ago and everything, industrial hygienists were all over that. What's another example? When the hurricanes hit in Houston, and do you remember seeing films about like factories, and there were seepage and explosions and everything, and they were worried about the particulate matter that might be affecting local residents, industrial hygienists were all over that. So I learned about this whole fascinating job world that I didn't know about, because I was bringing my expertise in building learning programs to this organization. So one of the fun things is that if you like to learn about different kinds of work, associations are a great way to do that. You sort of learn enough to be dangerous at a cocktail party, but sometimes people actually work for the association, get enthusiastic enough to actually go into the field and get a job there. It happens. But in the business, another thing of an association is that we always say there's an association for everything. Everything you can think of. I mean, Consumer Electronics Association, the International Sign Association, the National Association of Home Builders. I mean, just walk around and look around you on the streets here. If you go one block over on I Street, just go right over, and if you look closely, you'll see MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America. And I think they still list their members on the plaque outside. Used to be only five organizations. It was like Universal Pictures and MGM, and they were just in the news because they got a new member, Netflix. But there's a trade association, it's right over here. If you go over to Old Town Alexandria, you see them everywhere. And then the other thing is that you'll sometimes see associations and you'll think, oh, come on, really there's an association for that? Like, just this morning I saw it, the National Wooden Pallet Association. And I think, come on, you mean like skids, the things you see in warehouses? Well, don't be fooled, because even something that seems like pretty simplistic, there's a fascinating world underlying those, because they have to source the wood, so they're dealing with forestry issues, with manufacturing, with design to build really great looking pallets. Then they take them around the world, and sometimes they have to ship them back, or ship them. So reverse logistics. There's a whole lot more going on than when you're just thinking, oh, come on, just pallets. So it is a fascinating world. My personal story, I got over to industrial hygiene, and then a new CEO came on board and decided to reorganize, and thought that maybe they didn't need somebody at my level and at my pay. So we parted ways in September of 2017. So I had a great job at ASAE. I went over to take this great job. The CEO left, a new one came on board and said, thanks, but I don't think we'll need your services. It was an amicable parting, not hard feelings, and if I was going to be brutally honest, I'd say if I was sitting in the CEO chair, I might have made the same decision. It's just tough to be on the receiving end of it. So then suddenly I was 40 plus and looking for a job. And this was at the end of 2017. I'll tell you, last year was slow. I was in several searches. There were a lot where I interviewed and then heard nothing. Just what Jennifer was saying, you just have to get used to the silence sometimes. There were some where I made it to the finals, but I was not the finalist. So then the question becomes, well, what do? I have all this experience in the association world. What am I going to do with myself? I'm going to put some bread on the table, and I'm planning to work for quite a few more years. So what should I do? Well, I decided to become a consultant. And we sort of laugh in the business. We sometimes say when you're between successes, as we sometimes phrase it. I decided to offer my services to any associations that might be needing some help. And I got a couple gigs along the way, but then ironically at the beginning of this year, I got a call from ASAE, and one of my former team members was leaving to take a job with another association, and they had an opening and they needed an interim, so they asked would I be available to come back and work on an interim basis, basically doing part of my old job. So I said, sure, absolutely. And so it's put me back where I was, kind of dusting off my skills from 3 years ago and learning that. But I think even more importantly, it's put me back in the community. ASAE is a great location to be able to talk to a lot of other associations and just see what's out there. And actually, I'm starting to see a little business pick up. I hadn't planned to be a consultant. It's just sometimes, you got to make lemonade with what you got. So it's working for the moment, and I don't know if it will lead to another full-time position. Would love it to, but I'm very open to it. So yeah, I would say my words: I'm open, I'm positive, and I'm caffeinated. It's Monday morning. But I would just say that also a couple notes I made just to help your understanding. I know Jennifer talked about this. She made the point about not-for-profit. It's not that organizations don't make a profit. They do. It's just simply a tax category. When you talk about 501c3, C4, C6, that's just the section of the tax code where it defines tax-exempt organizations. So that's an important piece of lingo to know. That's all it means. It's just as a category. 501c3 is a charity and so forth. And I would say just the last thing too is there are so many organizations out there, particularly in this area, again, as has been mentioned. It's a great sector to work in. I really love working for associations, and especially because I'm kind of a learning geek, so I just love to get plunged into a new area. So whether you're interested in the healthcare sector or in industry or the chimney sweep guild, the golf course superintendents, the what have you, there's an association out there for everything. And I would just say keep plugging away at. This is the thing I would leave you with, is that, as I said, sometimes you'll come into silence, sometimes you'll do these interviews and you won't hear anything. Just consider that your rejection rate until you get that positive. Maybe your number is 15, maybe your number is 25, maybe you have to knock on 30 doors, and the 31st one is the one that works for you. So if you go out there and you get a chance to talk to them, great, go for it, be yourself, be enthusiastic, be positive. If it doesn't come through, okay, that's number 2. Let's move on to number 3, and stay at it until it comes through for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. So you can see Mark is a pretty amazing professional, and I really wanted him to tell his story because he's been doing, as you've heard, for the last year or so, what you all are doing right now, whether you've journeyed that journey for a year or just a few months. And so I thought it might be kind of inspiring to hear his story for you. So I've been told by Regine we can go for a few more minutes. We want to give you some.
She wants. That's what I said.
We want to give you some very practical resources. Hopefully, we've been trying to do that along the way. Give you a better sense of the scope, the scale of the sector itself, but also some very practical information. And so, real quick, we've talked about ASAE. It's the Center for Association Leadership. It was founded in 1920, and so again, we're coming up on our 100th anniversary. We are now a hybrid membership organization. So we have both individual members, and then companies can sign up their whole, organizations can sign up their whole staff. And so that has really made ASAE expand. So we went from historically 25,000 members for many years. We currently have 42,000. So we are growing rapidly. With our association executives and then our industry supplier community. And I want to note that there is a whole community, as I mentioned, that supply associations with things they need. So if you come from the for-profit sector, you have specific experience, you could go to ASAE, look at the buyer's guide, and find out the kinds of companies that are working with associations. Maybe you have experience there, and it could open up a whole new set of companies for you to look at. 7,300 organizations, and we're trying to figure out how to serve those folks. Just like many associations, their business models are evolving, and they need really smart people to help them figure it out. And we are working with folks both here in the U.S. and internationally as well. And we have a foundation, so like many organizations, you can look and see the association, that 501c6 entity, and it may have a foundation that if you're a fundraiser, for example, you may be able to work for an association that's a foundation that's part of an association. SHRM, the Society for Human Resources has the SHRM Foundation. ASAE has the ASAE Foundation, and so on. And then it also has the for-profit subsidiary as well. We have a variety of membership categories. So if you've been in the sector before and you've never joined, you might think about joining again for that networking. It is a very close community. Association professionals very much like to do business with people they know or do business with people who know people they know, right? So networking is big in our universe. And I would say if you're applying to an association, follow the process that's listed in that job posting, and then use your LinkedIn network, your own network, to see, do you know anybody at that organization who might be able to walk your name down to the HR, the hiring staff. You can do informational interviews as well. Association professionals are really happy to talk, so we can, you could call them up and say, hey, Jennifer, would you have 20 minutes of time to talk to me about what you're working on? This is my story. And always end with this question, every informational interview, who else do you think I should talk to? Would you give introduction to me for that? So people are usually willing. Yes?
I just had a question. Membership include access to the directory of the different associations?
So you can actually get that for free. What membership includes is a subscription to Associations Now. I'm going to talk about in other resources. There's actually something called the Daily Now that you can sign up for, and I'll have the website here, and I think Greg or Rajiv may circulate the slides to you afterwards. But the Daily Now comes to your email once a day. It's a little newsletter, and what our publication staff, our writers do, is take the issues out in the world and they filter it through the lens of association. So if you are going to interview with an association, you think this is your people, your sector, I think somebody said their people are here, get that daily news. That'll tell you what's hot, what are the trends, what's happening in the sector. And then it also, we have Collaborate. That's the other really great resource. Collaborate is ASAE's private social network, only open to members, where people are posting jobs sometimes, queries about expertise that they need, that sort of thing. So it's a great resource there. Career HQ, Association Career HQ. Before you leave, if you didn't already get one, please feel free to take one of our little notebooks. That'll have the name there for you. We are the career center for the association sector, and it's associationcareerhq.org. After April 1st, if you go to asaecenter.org, you'll see the career tab, and you'll be able to access it that way. Every month, we feature typically over 400 jobs, which can be searched in a variety of ways. And we have a network of 21 state and regional societies of association executives that we are networked with. So jobs that are in Chicago, jobs that are in New York, jobs that are in Oregon. When they're posted on those career sites, they come over to us. So over the course of the year, we've had over 5,500 jobs. So there are a lot of jobs, and most of them are in the DMV. So every month, you're going to find something there. Membership is not required, so you are welcome to use Association Creech. If you're not already on it, you can start using it today. And we do programming. It's free. It's by webinar on a whole host of topics, some of which you're getting exposure to here at 40 Plus, but it can give you a different spin on it. So doing your LinkedIn profile. We're going to be doing a Q&A. We did a Q&A with an HR expert asking, like, why don't people call me back? How can I break through those kinds of things? I wanted to show you the top job categories on Association Creech Q, as I'm sure is no surprise, membership. And people who are in membership come from a lot of backgrounds. But the role really is around being able to recruit and retain members. So if you have communications background, marketing background, sales background, business strategy background, you may be able to make a case that you can work in the membership area. Marketing is very prominent these days, as I mentioned. And then there's a whole host of other types of areas. I will say most associations tend to be fairly flat in structure. So you will have a CEO. You may have a C-suite. Some of it may be 1 or 2 positions wide, a CFO, a COO. Sometimes they're very large. Some of them have 5 or 6 SVPs or VPs. And then you'll typically have, some will have senior director, then a director, a manager, and coordinator kinds of level positions. So as you're thinking about positions, that's what you're generally going to see. We have a really easy job search function. You can apply right to the job. You can set up a profile in Association Career HQ that'll help you track what you've applied for. You can make your resume searchable if you wish. Employers that have a current 30-day job posting are the ones who can look in the resume database. And you can also set up a job alert, one or more, so you can pick criteria that are important to you. I want to see all the jobs in Virginia that are marketing jobs. And then those will just be sent out to you as they're posted. I mentioned the webinars. We also have some a la carte services. So we do offer a resume critique and writing service. We have a career coaching service, which is comprised of a cadre of folks who have expertise in coaching. They're all certified coaches, and they have worked specifically with folks in the sector. So if that's of interest to you, you can check that out. We have a service. It's a la carte, yes. So each of those you do pay, and there's a member, non-member rate, but that is a la carte. Reference verification service, so you can have a company call your references to see what they're really saying about you. And access to some salary data that is on our job where we have some median data. ASAE produces, as I said, this compensation and benefits study, and you can also download specific job functions, PDFs of those, and get those through our bookstore. Again, an a la carte kind of thing, but hopefully it'll, if you're interested, it can give you more data to help look at positions and what you're interested in. AssociationCareerHQ.org. Just a few other resources. How many of you are familiar already with GuideStar? Okay, I see some hands, which is great. If you're not, it's a great resource. It's a great resource personally if you're trying to give to something to figure out if it's worth giving to them. But associations that, I believe it's over 50,000 in revenue, have to file what's called a 990 each year with the IRS. That 990 document lists out their revenue, their expenses, their key players, so what the top people are making, and some great information about the organization. GuideStar used to offer most of that up for free. You just go guidestar.org. I think now you may have to set up some sort of profile to access it, but it's a great tool to use. Glassdoor, how many of you know Glassdoor? Great, good. So for those of you that don't, Glassdoor is a site, it's morphed into, like many of these sites, it's morphed into a job board, but it started out as a review site for employers. So they're not all associations are on it, but it's worth a check. If you're going to go in and interview with an association or nonprofit, you can put it in. You will be required to maintain a profile with them to get the full information, but it can give you a perspective on what it's like to work at a company or an organization. Some other job boards that serve the sector, ours is the best. But for association and nonprofit jobs, for association jobs, I'll certainly argue it's the best. But these are some others out there. Idealist.org, those tend to be those real advocacy, grassroots kinds of jobs. It's smaller than it used to be. The Chronicle of Philanthropy, there's also, not up here, the Council on Foundations, which focuses specifically on those foundations. CEO Update, if there are folks among you who are looking for executive level positions, you will see some on our site, some on CEO Update. The Nonprofit Times, a publication that serves the sector, has a job board. Of course, the Post will list nonprofit jobs as well, and association jobs. So just some sampling here for you of places you can look. Many of you may be using Indeed, or juggernaut friend Indeed. They are really that mass job board, right? So I would encourage you to think about using niche boards, if you're not already, as part of your toolkit. And by a niche board, I mean a board that's going to have a lot fewer jobs probably posted, and it's going to be pretty curated to be specifically what you're interested in. And they're real jobs. So sometimes on Indeed, on those big boards, you're never quite sure if it's really a job that's open. So take a look at those. The CAE, it's Certified Association Executive. Some of you have worked in the sector, you care about the sector already. You may have what it takes to get your CAE. It's just another credential to look at. If you're interested, you can go to asaecenter.org to learn more. And it involves a period of meeting the requirements and then taking an exam and then maintaining that certification as you go. And so those criteria are actually updated recently, so really going to ASAE Center is the best place. 2 final resources for you. Associationsnow.com I mentioned, if you want to sign up for the daily news. It's well done. And it will give you an example of the kinds of writing that people are doing. I know some of you mentioned being writers, so. And then the Power of A has a find an association, so that goes to your question more about how do I find an association. Associations don't always start with the word association. Sometimes, right, they're societies, they're guilds, the Organist Guild, there is an Organist Guild. The Flautists have their own group too. So just a few others, and we'll make sure that you get these. And that's what we have. So I know that was a ton. Regine said we had a few minutes for questions. If you have questions that we can answer for you.
Are there any major conferences that the association has nationwide?
So that's a great question. It actually reminds me, if you remember nothing else, I would ask that you remember that, and I have to thank Regine for this, that associations really are the triple threat, like J-Lo.
Like J-Lo.
Right, so I've been talking to you primarily today about the sector and working at an association. And especially in the DMV, that's a place you can work at the association. But each one of you, I guarantee, has an association affiliation that you could make. And each of those associations will offer a job board, often a niche job board, where you can go look for forensic accounting jobs. There's an association for that. They also offer career resources, similar to what we do. And because you have the credential in that area, you may find new ways to extend your learning and to network, as Mark did. So associations, triple threat. 1 is it's a place to work at the association. 2 is you can use an association to further your career, because there's an association for everything. Just find it and they will have some layer of career networking resources for you. And 3rd, volunteering. So you heard Mark's story. He got 3 jobs out of being a volunteer. So I know when you're in an active job search, the thought of volunteering is probably exhausting. But it might be just the thing if you can find a way with your professional association. They often will now have online volunteering that you can do, and you can start networking. If you're not already doing that, take a look at that. So that's another way that associations can help your job search. So just wanted to mention that. In terms of conferences, meetings, trade shows are huge for associations. So ASAE has 6 major meetings a year, a very robust event planning meetings group. And our major meeting is in OB in Columbus this year, in August every year. And then, as I say, each of those associations that you might affiliate with probably have meetings, sometimes local, where you could go and network. So take advantage of all the different ways of the sector. Yes?
Yeah, first, thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
Very informative. Are there many temporary or part-time positions on these job boards with associations and doing meaningful work, like maybe project-oriented, or are there many?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple of things. Associations we're seeing some more outsourcing being done. They do, as Mark alluded to, they will bring in consultants. That's one way they do that. And then in temporary help, some are moving to attempt to perm, but it's not super common. So you will not see temp positions. Like on Association Creech Q, not many of those. Most of them are full-time and require a minimum of 3 to 5 years experience. There's not a lot of entry level anymore. And that's really post-recession. The sector was whacked like everybody else, and they learned to do a lot more with a lot less. And so there are agencies that serve the association sector. So there's a group called the Creative Group. I've hired 2 people from that for manager, marketing manager level type positions called the Creative Group. So I know they source to associations and nonprofits. They are a for-profit staffing agency, so to be clear. There's a group called the Creative Group. The Creative Group. There's a group called Nonprofit HR. They do a lot of different things, but one of the things that they do is some staffing work as well. They are not the only ones, so that's why I would encourage you, if you go to asaecenter.org, I mentioned looking at the industry suppliers. If you go to the buyer's guide, so you have to hit the marketplace and then scroll down and you'll find the buyer's guide. You can filter, and one of the filters is HR category, and then recruiting, you can find some of those other firms. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that could be another way if you're looking for some temporary work that would help you get your foot in the door. The nature of that work will vary. But yeah.
And if people are looking for a volunteer consulting opportunity, are you familiar with the Taproot Foundation?
Yes, I've heard of them. Do you know more about them, or are you just?
So they have offices in different cities like New York. DC is one of them. And sometimes in the ASAE or Chronicle postings for jobs, you'll see that they'll be looking for consultants to work on short-term projects or maybe a long-term project. So there may be a nonprofit organization that's looking for a marketing person. They don't have the resources to pay someone. So nonprofits can apply to the Taproot Foundation for support to get a consultant who will pro bono work for them. So sometimes you'll see those postings in one of the job sites that you mentioned, or you may not. So you just may want to check out their website if you just want to do something to stay engaged.
Thank you.
And to help out.
Did everybody get that? It's called Taproot. Yeah. Taproot.org, I would imagine. Yeah. So, any other resources to share or questions? Yes, sir.
I had a question going back to your section on associationese.
Yes.
Other than, for example, not referring to a prospective employer as a company, is there anything else, broadly speaking? I realize there's a big range of associations, so maybe this might not be answerable, but in terms of phrasing of skills, or when you're crafting like a cover letter, or when you're looking like a statement of your goals in a resume, are there some hot buttons to avoid or be sure to mention when you're talking about an association?
Yeah, I'll start, and Mark, if you have other things to add. So a couple of things. Acronyms do reign supreme in the sector, so learn the acronyms, and in particular, learn how the acronym of the organization is pronounced. So people would talk about APTA, but they don't call themselves APTA. They say APTA. But there may be another group that says NATCA, which we all hear, if any NATS makers here, was here NATCA, which is the Air Traffic Controllers Association. They don't go by NATC, they go by NATCA. So it's little things like that are just subtle ways. I mean, it sounds kind of maybe silly, but it's a subtle way of showing you've done your homework, right? And what their acronyms in their issues, as Mark said. So the industrial hygienist will have a whole bunch of science issues. So can you surf some of their articles? Can you get a copy of their publication? Anything you can do to sort of demonstrate that you've taken the time to, you don't have to know the whole world unless you know the whole world, that's always helpful too, but that you've taken the time. So that would be one thing. And then, as I say, and I provided a handout, this is not exclusive to us, but I came across this a couple years ago now from the National Association of College Counselors, NACE, they did a transferable skills list. So I've made copies of it for you. And I think especially if you're coming into the sector, really trying to make sure that you're translating, which you're always trying to do, I know, but translating how does this speak to what the membership is doing or the donors are doing and how it can relate. How can you give value, help further that mission? So that's what I would say. Also, remember the cover letter matters. I know it may be tempting and it's hard, right? So like everyone else, associations are using applicant tracking systems now. Take the time if you can to get into that and adjust and make sure that usually the systems will allow you to do that. So don't just hit send, make sure all your information, if you've uploaded, that you've gone through and curated the information in your application. But do a cover letter to make your case. It doesn't always, it's not 100%, but I think that's where you can really make your pitch about why you can help the organization.
Yeah. No, I would just support that. I'd say cover letter is really important, especially if it's something that's going to be, I'd say director level and above. I just saw somebody post on Collaborate, ASAE's community, and it was an HR director who said, if someone's looking for a senior management position and they don't include a cover letter, I don't even pay attention. I thought that was very telling. So take the time. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but I think just picking up what you say, learn something about the association, just put something in the second paragraph about, here's what I've got, here's where I think it might be of value to you.
Yeah, so, yes.
I've been to ASAE's membership and communications and marketing conference. It was really good. And I'm curious, does ASAE offer staff that helps the association directly, or is it where you kind of rely on best practices from other association help, or could I work, say, for ASAE to help organizations understand what a communication strategy looks like, or here's how you should communicate to your members? Can you kind of
I can, yeah. So ASAE is considered a large staff organization. We have over 100 employees, so in our world that's a large staff association. There are folks, Mark is in the learning area, and that's their focus, to help people do that kind of thing. And our focus is producing resources to help the people who staff, manage, and lead associations do what they do better. And we do that in a lot of ways. So there is a host of staff positions, and ASAE posts all of its open staff positions on Association Creech Q, as you would imagine. So you can look at any time, put in ASAE, and you'll see what's open. ASAE also engages consultants. And that whole process is really done at the department level based on the project that's needed. And it's usually done, some groups will do RFPs, but you kind of have to be in the know to find out the RFP. And so Mark can probably tell you more about that. But most of the successful consultants that I know build their business word of mouth. They get engaged in the community. They have a face of the franchise themselves, or there's someone else who's in the community, becomes known, and they start getting business. So I know we're over, Greg. I'm so sorry. So I don't want to do that, but any other questions or anything else?
I did want, Mark mentioned in his story working for associations that he, like the industrial hygienists, that you didn't know really anything about ahead of time. How is that a common thing that you can get into a trade association where you really don't have any background, or they really look for people that have the background?
I'm really glad you mentioned that. I think some associations do hire practitioners very often in their practice, especially healthcare. So there were physical therapists on staff at APTA. They did healthcare policy, that kind of thing. But the rest of the staff were functional experts in finance or administration or marketing or whatever. So you don't, they're looking for the expertise needed for the position.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, well, we have notebooks here. We have the transferable skills list. Mark and I will stay for a few minutes. Thank you so much. It was a privilege to talk with you. We hope it was helpful.